been running round and round and round, and I got nothing left. There's nothing like a sunset skyline to let you know you're almost home. So breathe in and hold tight. I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley where the kids collide into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. I'm coming home tonight. I know you're ready for the stars to fly into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. 'Cause I'm coming home to. Yes, I'm coming home to. Time has a way of diluting emotions, but I won't let distance get in between us, no. Oh, I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley where the kids collide into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. Coming alive. I'm coming home.
Tahun 2023 disebut menjadi tahun yang penuh tantangan untuk ekonomi global. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development atau OECD memprediksi pertumbuhan ekonomi global bakal melemah dari 3,1% pada 2022 menjadi 2,2% pada 2023. International Monetary Fund atau IMF juga meramalkan ekonomi dunia bakal melambat dari 3,2% pada 2022 menjadi 2,7% pada 2023. Adapun menurut survei PricewaterhouseCoopers atau PwC, 67% investor kelas kakap global menilai tantangan utama 2023 adalah inflasi. Selain inflasi, 62% investor menganggap volatilitas ekonomi makro sebagai ancaman. Sementara 37% investor menilai tantangan di 2023 adalah konflik geopolitik. Sisanya ancaman datang dari keamanan cyber, perubahan iklim, resiko kesehatan, serta kesenjangan sosial. Untuk mengetahui informasi berbasis data lainnya, silakan kunjungi katadata.co.id/katadata insight center.
That geopolitics has been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. In theory, humanity has become more advanced and more civilized. However, in geopolitics, the laws that applied several thousand years ago are still alive today. Today, the number one power is the US. The number two power is China. Since the number two power, China, looks like it's going to overtake the number one power soon, all great powers will put their national interests ahead of their values in their foreign policies. Nonetheless, when adherence to this principle meant that national interests would be sacrificed, one big lesson I have learned after 33 years in diplomacy is that good diplomacy can make a huge difference. About diplomacy is that diplomats are honest people who are sent abroad to lie for their country. It was a terrible conflict in which 300,000 to 400,000 Chinese died, 40,000 Americans died, and nearly 3 million Korean civilians and soldiers died. This is why the rest of the world needs to learn from the European Union.
Pada era Di mana kecepatan teknologi dan informasi berkembang cepat, perubahan adalah hal yang pasti. Negara harus siap menyesuaikan sistem pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik untuk mengatasi efek dari perubahan yang ada. Untuk itu, Golkar Institute hadir dalam mencetak pengambil keputusan masa depan yang siap mengantar Indonesia menuju kemajuan yang pesat. Golkar Institute berkomitmen untuk membina tunas bangsa dengan bekal pendidikan berbasis nilai dan peka zaman yang mencakup 3 pilar kemampuan, yaitu bidang ekonomi, politik, dan kepemimpinan. Golkar Institute melihat perubahan sebagai sebuah peluang yang melahirkan pemikiran inovatif, sudut pandang baru, dan strategi yang mutakhir. Kami mengolah efek perubahan menjadi hal yang positif dan tepat guna. Sehingga di Golkar Institute, kami mengembangkan efek menjadi efektivitas.
That for countries to succeed, they have to implement MPH. MPH stands for meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. And that's exactly what an institute like the Golkar Institute can do, because it can find the next generation, young leaders in Indonesia, educate them about the world, educate them about the best public policies to be carried out. And I'm very confident that as younger generations of Indonesians go through the Golkar Institute and they come out with a better understanding of the world and a better understanding of the successful public policies around the world, they will help to ensure that Indonesia continues to succeed.
Ahli-ahli kebijakan publik dan ilmu pemerintahan yang lahir di Golkar Institute adalah tumpuan tumbuhnya birokrasi yang responsif, peka akan kebutuhan masyarakat, dan mampu meningkatkan daya saing sumber daya manusia Indonesia. Dengan kemampuan merancang sinergi antara pemerintahan dan teknologi digital, Sivitas Akademika Golkar Institute dapat mengambil peran di tengah landscape kolaborasi dan kompetisi geopolitik berskala global, serta menghapuskan sekat peluang sosioekonomi antara daerah dan kota besar di ranah politik nasional untuk menciptakan kesejahteraan yang merata. Golkar Institute siap menjadi garda terdepan perubahan dalam memajukan kebijakan publik dan pemerintahan yang transformatif, inovatif, berintegritas, serta berwawasan global dalam mewujudkan good governance. Golkar Institute akan menjadi tempat di mana Anda dapat berkarya dengan para pemenang, pemimpin dunia, dan changemaker untuk memberi sumbangsi pada negeri.
Begitu banyak perubahan mendisrupsi hidup kita. Begitu juga dalam pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik. Kita membutuhkan pemimpin masa depan yang memahami dinamika zaman. Golkar Institute, Sekolah Pemerintahan dan Kebijakan Publik, melahirkan pemimpin-pemimpin dengan 3 pilar kemampuan, yakni ekonomi, politik, dan kepemimpinan. Sekolah Pemerintahan dan Kebijakan Publik bertujuan untuk mencetak kader-kader pemimpin dalam bidang pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik demi kemajuan Partai Golkar dan Indonesia. Golkar Institute akan menjadi sekolah pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik pertama dan terbaik yang didirikan oleh partai politik. Golkar Institute, Sekolah Pemerintahan dan Kebijakan Publik, sekolah pencetak pemimpin masa depan Indonesia, sumbangsih Partai Golkar untuk Indonesia dan dunia.
Been stuck in motion, moving too fast, trying to catch a moment, it slips through my hands. All I see are long days
kami jelas, yaitu kami ingin mencetak kepemimpinan politik yang transformatif.
I've been running round and round and round, and I got nothing left. There's nothing like a sunset skyline to let you know you're almost home. So breathe in and hold tight. I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley where the kids collide into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. I'm coming home tonight. I know you're ready for the stars to fly into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. 'Cause I'm coming home to. Yes, I'm coming home to. Time has a way of diluting emotions, but I won't let distance get in between us, no. Oh, I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley where the kids collide into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. Coming alive. I'm coming home.
Tahun 2023 disebut menjadi tahun yang penuh tantangan untuk ekonomi global. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development atau OECD memprediksi pertumbuhan ekonomi global bakal melemah dari 3,1% pada 2022 menjadi 2,2% pada 2023. International Monetary Fund atau IMF juga meramalkan ekonomi dunia bakal melambat dari 3,2% pada 2022 menjadi 2,7% pada 2023. Adapun menurut survei PricewaterhouseCoopers atau PwC, 67% investor kelas kakap global menilai tantangan utama 2023 adalah inflasi. Selain inflasi, 62% investor menganggap volatilitas ekonomi makro sebagai ancaman. Sementara 37% investor menilai tantangan di 2023 adalah konflik geopolitik. Sisanya ancaman datang dari keamanan cyber, perubahan iklim, resiko kesehatan, serta kesenjangan sosial. Untuk mengetahui informasi berbasis data lainnya, silakan kunjungi katadata.co.id/katadata insight center.
That geopolitics has been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. In theory, humanity has become more advanced and more civilized. However, in geopolitics, the laws that applied several thousand years ago are still alive today. Today, the number one power is the US. The number two power is China. Since the number two power, China, looks like it's going to overtake the number one power soon, all great powers will put their national interests ahead of their values in their foreign policies. Nonetheless, when adherence to this principle meant that national interests would be sacrificed, one big lesson I have learned after 33 years in diplomacy is that good diplomacy can make a huge difference. About diplomacy, is that diplomats are honest people who are sent abroad to lie for their country. It was a terrible conflict in which 300,000 to 400,000 Chinese died, 40,000 Americans died, and nearly 3 million Korean civilians and soldiers died. This is why the rest of the world needs to learn from the European Union.
Pada era di mana kecepatan teknologi dan informasi berkembang cepat, perubahan adalah hal yang pasti. Negara harus siap menyesuaikan sistem pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik untuk mengatasi efek dari perubahan yang ada. Untuk itu, Golkar Institute hadir dalam mencetak pengambil keputusan masa depan yang siap mengantar Indonesia menuju kemajuan yang pesat. Golkar Institute berkomitmen untuk membina tunas bangsa dengan bekal pendidikan berbasis nilai dan peka zaman yang mencakup 3 pilar kemampuan, yaitu bidang ekonomi, politik, dan kepemimpinan. Golkar Institute melihat perubahan sebagai sebuah peluang yang melahirkan pemikiran inovatif, sudut pandang baru, dan strategi yang mutakhir. Kami mengolah efek perubahan menjadi hal yang positif dan tepat guna. Sehingga di Golkar Institute, kami mengembangkan efek menjadi efektivitas.
That for countries to succeed, they have to implement MPH. MPH stands for meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. And that's exactly what an institute like the Golkar Institute can do, because it can find the next generation, young leaders in Indonesia, educate them about the world, educate them about the best public policies to be carried out, and I'm very confident that as younger generations of Indonesians go through the Golkar Institute and they come out with a better understanding of the world and a better understanding of the successful public policies around the world, they will help to ensure that Indonesia continues to succeed.
Ahli-ahli kebijakan publik dan ilmu pemerintahan yang lahir di Golkar Institute adalah tumpuan tumbuhnya birokrasi yang responsif, peka akan kebutuhan masyarakat, dan mampu meningkatkan daya saing sumber daya manusia Indonesia. Dengan kemampuan merancang sinergi antara pemerintahan dan teknologi digital, Sivitas Akademika Golkar Institute dapat mengambil peran di tengah landscape kolaborasi dan kompetisi geopolitik berskala global, serta menghapuskan sekat peluang sosioekonomi antara daerah dan kota besar di ranah politik nasional untuk menciptakan kesejahteraan yang merata. Golkar Institute siap menjadi garda terdepan perubahan dalam memajukan kebijakan publik dan pemerintahan yang transformatif, inovatif, berintegritas, serta berwawasan global dalam mewujudkan good governance. Golkar Institute akan menjadi tempat di mana Anda dapat berkarya dengan para pemenang, pemimpin dunia, dan changemaker untuk memberi sumbangsi pada negeri.
Begitu banyak perubahan mendisrupsi hidup kita. Begitu juga dalam pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik. Kita membutuhkan pemimpin masa depan yang memahami dinamika zaman. Golkar Institute, Sekolah Pemerintahan dan Kebijakan Publik, melahirkan pemimpin-pemimpin dengan 3 pilar kemampuan, yakni ekonomi, politik, dan kepemimpinan. Sekolah Pemerintahan dan Kebijakan Publik bertujuan untuk mencetak kader-kader pemimpin dalam bidang pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik demi kemajuan Partai Golkar dan Indonesia. Golkar Institute akan menjadi sekolah pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik pertama dan terbaik yang didirikan oleh partai politik. Golkar Institute, sekolah pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik, sekolah pencetak pemimpin masa depan Indonesia, sumbangsih Partai Golkar untuk Indonesia dan dunia.
I've been stuck in motion, moving too fast, trying to catch a moment. It slips through my hands. All I see are long days and dark nights. I'm lost without you, but I'm on my way, so hold tight. I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley.
Visi kami jelas, yaitu kami ingin mencetak kepemimpinan politik yang transformatif.
Coming home tonight. I know you're ready for the stars to fly into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive.
Dan lupa pilih nomor.
Coming home tonight. Yes, my town is coming alive. I'm coming home tonight. I know you're ready for the stars to fly into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. 'Cause I'm coming home to. Yes, I'm coming home to. Time has a way of diluting emotions, but I won't let distance get in between us, no. Oh, I'm coming home tonight. Meet me in the valley where the kids collide into the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive. Coming alive. I'm coming home to the morning. Oh my God, my town is coming alive.
Tahun 2023 disebut menjadi tahun yang penuh tantangan untuk ekonomi global. Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development atau OECD memprediksi pertumbuhan ekonomi global bakal melemah dari 3,1% pada 2022 menjadi 2,2% pada 2023. International Monetary Fund atau IMF juga meramalkan ekonomi dunia bakal melambat dari 3,2% pada 2022 menjadi 2,7% pada 2023. Adapun menurut survei PricewaterhouseCoopers atau PwC, 67% investor kelas kakap global menilai tantangan utama 2023 adalah inflasi. Selain inflasi, 62% investor menganggap volatilitas ekonomi makro sebagai ancaman. Sementara 37% investor menilai tantangan di 2023 adalah konflik geopolitik. Sisanya ancaman datang dari keamanan cyber, perubahan iklim, resiko kesehatan, serta kesenjangan sosial. Untuk mengetahui informasi berbasis data lainnya, silakan kunjungi katadata.co.id/katadata insight center.
That geopolitics has been around for 2,000 or 3,000 years. In theory, humanity has become more advanced and more civilized. However, in geopolitics, the laws that applied several thousand years ago are still alive today. Today, the number one power is the US. The number two power is China. Since the number two power, China, looks like it's going to overtake the number one power soon, all great powers will put their national interests ahead of their values in their foreign policies. Nonetheless, when adherence to this principle meant that national interests would be sacrificed, One big lesson I have learned after 33 years in diplomacy is that good diplomacy can make a huge difference. About diplomacy is that diplomats are honest people who are sent abroad to lie for their country. It was a terrible conflict in which 300,000 to 400,000 Chinese died, 40,000 Americans died, and nearly 3 million Korean civilians and soldiers died. This is why the rest of the world needs to learn from the European Union.
Pada era di mana kecepatan teknologi dan informasi berkembang cepat, perubahan adalah hal yang pasti. Negara harus siap menyesuaikan sistem pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik untuk mengatasi efek dari perubahan yang ada. Untuk itu, Golkar Institute hadir dalam mencetak pengambil keputusan masa depan yang siap mengantar Indonesia menuju kemajuan yang pesat. Golkar Institute berkomitmen untuk membina tunas bangsa dengan bekal pendidikan berbasis nilai dan peka zaman yang mencakup 3 pilar kemampuan, yaitu bidang ekonomi, politik, dan kepemimpinan. Golkar Institute melihat perubahan sebagai sebuah peluang yang melahirkan pemikiran inovatif, sudut pandang baru, dan strategi yang mutakhir. Kami mengolah efek perubahan menjadi hal yang positif dan tepat guna. Sehingga di Golkar Institute, kami mengembangkan efek menjadi efektivitas.
That for countries to succeed, they have to implement MPH. MPH stands for meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. And that's exactly what an institute like the Golkar Institute can do, because it can find the next generation, young leaders in Indonesia, educate them about the world, educate them about the best public policies to be carried out, and I'm very confident that as younger generations of Indonesians go through the Golkar Institute and they come out with a better understanding of the world and a better understanding of the successful public policies around the world, they will help to ensure that Indonesia continues to succeed.
Ahli-ahli kebijakan publik dan ilmu pemerintahan yang lahir di Golkar Institute adalah tumpuan tumbuhnya birokrasi yang responsif, peka akan kebutuhan masyarakat, dan mampu meningkatkan daya saing sumber daya manusia Indonesia. Dengan kemampuan merancang sinergi antara pemerintahan dan teknologi digital, Sivitas Akademika Golkar Institute dapat mengambil peran di tengah landscape kolaborasi dan kompetisi geopolitik berskala global, serta menghapuskan sekat peluang sosioekonomi antara daerah dan kota besar di ranah politik nasional untuk menciptakan kesejahteraan yang merata. Golkar Institute siap menjadi garda terdepan perubahan dalam memajukan kebijakan publik dan pemerintahan yang transformatif, inovatif, berintegritas, serta berwawasan global dalam mewujudkan good governance. Golkar Institute akan menjadi tempat di mana Anda dapat berkarya dengan para pemenang, pemimpin dunia, dan change maker untuk memberi sumbangsi pada negeri.
Begitu banyak perubahan mendisrupsi hidup kita. Begitu juga dalam pemerintahan dan kebijakan publik. Kita membutuhkan pemimpin masa depan yang memahami dinamika zaman. Golkar Institute.
Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, may I have your attention, please? Ya. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, may peace be upon us all. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, greetings of virtue. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests and fellow knowledge seekers, good afternoon all. I'm Adinda from Golkar Institute, and I'm so honored to be here to be your Master of Ceremonies for this special public lecture event. Before we start, I would like to greet first the Deputy Chairman of the Golkar Party, Bapak Firman Subagio, Bapak Erwin Aksa, Bapak Rizal Malarangeng, Ibu Hatifah Saifudian, the Secretary General of the Golkar Party and also member of the Governing Board of the Golkar Institute, Bapak Letnan Purnawirawan Lodwig Frederick Paulus, the Deputy Chairman of the Golkar Party Expert Council, Professor Yudi Krisnandi, the Ambassador, His Excellency Mr. Rum Kono, Ambassador of Indonesia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, Her Excellency Ms. Gina Jamoralin, Ambassador of the Philippines to Indonesia, the Chairman of the Golkar Institute Management Board, Bapak Dr. Aceh Hasan Sazili, and all the members of Management and Supervisory Board of Golkar Institute. And also for all members of the House of Representatives of the Republic of Indonesia from the Golkar Party faction, all friends from Gerindra Party and PKS, academics, NGO friends, and the media. I apologize for not being able to mention one by one, but thank you very much for being here and welcome to the public lecture of Golkar Institute. Today we gather here to expand our knowledge and horizons about current geopolitical conditions and where the world is headed through this public lecture by the distinguished fellow of the Asia Research Institute, National University of Singapore, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. This event is organized by Golkar Institute, Indonesia's first school of government and public policy that was established by a political party and supported by Kata Data Insight Center. And to start this event, let us begin by singing our national anthem as a symbol of our unity and pride, Indonesia Raya. Please stand. Thank you. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, now we have the privilege to hear welcome remarks from our Chairman of the Management Board of Golkar Institute, Bapak Dr. Aceh Hasan Sajili. Please join me in welcoming Bapak Aceh Hasan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Excellencies, Professor Kishore Mahbubani, Distinguished Fellow at Asia Research Institute, National University of Singapore, and also member of Advisory Board of Golkar Institute. Yang kami hormati Sekretaris Jenderal DPP Partai Golkar, Bapak Letnan Jenderal TNI Purnawirawan Ludwig Frederick Paulus, yang juga Wakil Ketua DPR RI, Representative of Foreign Embassy in Jakarta, Member of Parliament, Republic of Indonesia, Member of Governing Board, Supervisory Board, and Executive Board of Golkar Institute, and hadirin sekalian yang kami hormati. Good afternoon and welcome. It is great pleasure for us to welcome everyone for this event, public lecture by Professor Kishore Mahbubani, organized by Golkar Institute in partnership with Kata Data Insight Center. Golkar Institute was established in 2020 based on directive of National Assembly, which mandate to creation of learning and training platform for Indonesia, promising young political leader, not just for Golkar Party, but from all over of Indonesia, regardless of their background. During the setup of Golkar Institute, we were happy because we received input and advice from our advisory board member. These include Professor Kishore Mahbubani, from National University of Singapore, Professor Sopian Effendi from UGM, Professor Eko Prasojo from UE, and other prominent thinker and academic in public policy. We established Golkar Institute with 3 educational pillars, which are leadership, politics, and economic. Until today, we are still consistent using those pillars in all of our training program. Alhamdulillah, Golkar Institute has conducted several batch of our one-week program we call Executive Education Program for Young Political Leader. Hadir di sini juga para alumninya dari Golkar Institute. The latest one was just complete last week. One of our lecture was Indonesian presidential candidate Bapak Letnan Jenderal Prabowo Subianto, dan hadir di tengah kita juga tim ahli dari Bapak Prabowo Subianto. Mohon berdiri, Pak. Ini teman-teman, ada Profesor Burhanuddin Abdullah, Profesor Rahmat Pambudi, dan teman-teman sekalian. We also had Professor Eduardo Araral from Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy and Professor Marcus Misner from Australian National University. Uh, our alumni are spread across the country from Sabang to Merauke. Our regions are represented. We have 30 quota for women participants. We give our scholarship for promising young politicians who need financial help. Many of our alumni are politics, either already as local member of parliament or will be running as legislative for next election. But many of them are also professional, working as professional, entrepreneur, academic, researcher, empowerment worker, and civil servant. Yes, some Golkar Institute alumni are civil servant. This program is open and inclusive to all, and there is no requirement to join Golkar Party afterward. We aim to support Indonesia promising young political leaders so they can achieve their full potential. Honorable ladies and gentlemen, in this event, I would like to invite you all in Saturday, 60 September. I invite you attend to another Golkar Institute public lecture by former Philippine President, Her Excellency Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. She will be talking about the leadership and resilience in the Asian region. Those are some introductory notes about Golkar Institute. I hope you found them useful. Thank you again to Professor Kishore Mahbubani for being the main speaker in today's event. And I would like to thanks to Dr. Rizal Malarangeng, Vice Chairman of Golkar Institute Executive Board, who will moderate this dialogue and Q&A. Saya juga mohon maaf pada Bapak Ibu sekalian dan menyampaikan Bapak Erlangga Hartarto, Ketua Umum Partai Golkar. Beliau harus mendampingi Bapak Presiden untuk bertemu dengan Vice President of America, Kamala Harris, sehingga tidak bisa hadir pada kesempatan ini. I wish you an insightful and productive event. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Bapak Acho, for your welcome remarks. Your insights are greatly appreciated. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, now we have come to our main agenda, the public lecture session. And to guide us through this enlightening discourse, I would like to invite and introduce our moderator for today's session. He is prominent Indonesian political scientist, politician, and prolific writer. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome our moderator, Bapak Dr. Rizal Malarangeng. And before we ask Prof. Kishore to the stage, please allow me to read his short bio first. Professor Kishore is Distinguished Fellow at the Asia Research Institute, National University of Singapore, and has had a remarkable career in diplomacy, including serving as Singapore's ambassador to the United Nations 2 times, and as the President of the United Nations Security Council. He is a prolific author who has published articles in prominent outlets like Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, the New York Times, and the Financial Times, and co-authored articles with global thought leaders like Kofi Annan, Klaus Schwab, and Larry Summers. He has published 8 books, including Can Asia Think, Can the New ASEAN Hemisphere, The ASEAN Miracle, and Has China Won? His most recent book is The ASEAN 21st Century, is available through open access via Springer and has been downloaded over 3.16 million times. And today, he will share his insight on current geopolitical condition and where the world is headed with us. And because this is like a golden opportunity for us, we also encourage the audience to participate actively by preparing questions for the Q&A session following Professor Kishore's lecture. And now, please join me in warmly welcoming Professor Kishore Mahbubani.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Dinda. Thank you, Pak Kishore. It's always welcome to you, sir, and it's always fortunate to have you with us, especially among the young members of Golkar. They are the future leaders of Indonesia. In the coming election, well, 5 more months, the seniors, the leader, Pak Erlangga, Pak Ludwig, welcome Pak Ludwig, Pak Aceh will play a very important role. But in the 2-3 election next, 10 years, 15 years, I think they will play a very prominent role in our country. And don't be surprised, Pak, if one of them will become also a presidential or vice presidential candidate. In the future, we are talking the future. Now it's Pak Erlangga's time. You have to be sabar. Wait for your time. That's why learn the lesson from Pak Kishore first about geopolitics and the direction of the world. It's a very important question. In fact, the most important question people are asking now. What is the direction of the world toward the end of the 21st century? This question is the most important, and then Pak Kishore will explain that the fate of humankind depends on the answer to this precise question. What is the direction of the world? Now, before I forget, special welcome to the members of the think tank of Gerindra and Pak Prabowo. Led by Pak Burhanuddin Abdullah, an old friend, but a new coalition partner. As I remember last week, Pak Prabowo said in our Golkar Institute forum that he was quite impressed with Golkar Institute. Right? He said that explicitly, and he ordered one of the elites of Gerindra to also establish Gerindra Institute. But we want to show the country that Golkar Party is the party of ideas. I don't want to campaign here, but so it's your forum. So the question is very important. Geopolitics matters now. Okay? There will be many answers, one of which perhaps will be elaborated by Professor Kishore. But everybody knows now that perhaps we have entered what we call the Second Cold War, in which competitions among great powers, maybe the name of the countries are different, but the nature of the competition and the impact of the competition will affect, once again, all of the country in the world. So our country, ASEAN countries and other countries will be affected by the dynamics of the coming, hopefully not conflict, but cooperation, or certain kind of hard competition. We'll have to find the answer from one of the wisest men of ASEAN. I don't have to introduce Pak Kishore. If I introduce Pak Kishore in this forum among Golkar members, that means you introduce your family member to your own family members. It's not proper, Pak. We already know him. He's advisor of Golkar Institute. What I can tell you is one thing. He's the intellectual of ASEAN, the most well-known in the world of a writer from ASEAN. Young people of Golkar, you have to read many books about geopolitics. Okay? But if you have very limited time, read only the books written by Kishore Mahbubani. So with that introduction, I welcome you, Pak. Please give us your thoughts and ideas about the most important question of today. Thank you, Pak.
Thank you very much, Pak Rizal, for that very warm and generous welcome. I'm so glad that this is the first time I'm appearing in person in the Golkar Institute. You've seen me virtually in the video, so I'm happy to confirm that I'm alive. So, you know, there's an Arab proverb which says, he who speaks about the future lies, even when he tells the truth. Because as we know, there's so many surprises in the world all the time. So when I come to speak about a lecture about where the world is headed, in some ways I'm maybe telling you a lie. Because the world may change, right? Whatever I say may come untrue, right? That's the danger about speaking about the future, you know. You can't control the future. But at the same time, I have absolutely no doubt that over the next 10 years, the world will be shaken by an accelerating geopolitical contest between the United States and China. That's almost like a certainty over the next 10 years. And I guarantee you that your lives will be rocked by this contest in one way or another. And that's why, because our lives are going to be affected by this contest, we should try to understand it as best as they can. And that's why, as you know, I wrote my book, Has China Won?, to try and explain what was going on. So what I'll do today is that I'll try to divide my remarks into 3 parts, and basically answer 3 questions. One is, what is this US-China contest all about? Number 1. Number 2, what are the implications for the rest of the world? And what are the threats and opportunities for us in ASEAN from the US-China contest? So let me begin by answering the question, what is this US-China contest all about? And why am I so certain that the US-China contest will accelerate? And the reason why I'm so confident it will accelerate is because this contest is being driven by structural forces, right? Not by personalities. And one of the structural forces is what I call the iron law of geopolitics. And this iron law of geopolitics has been around for 2,000 years. You know, humanity doesn't change. It's been around for 2,000 years. And in this iron law of geopolitics says that whenever the world's number 1 emerging power, which today is China, is about to overtake the world's number 1 power, which today is United States of America, the world's number 1 power always pushes down the world's number 1 emerging power. This is an iron law. It operates all the time. And that's why I know that the next 10 years will be very rocky, because there's the incredible consensus in the Washington, D.C. establishment that the United States has only about 10 years to stop China. Because the United States knows that if it doesn't stop China, and if China becomes the number one economy in the world, everything changes. And so there's a sense of desperation in Washington, D.C., and also a determination to stop China at all costs. And what is remarkable is that you have an incredible bipartisan consensus on this in Washington, D.C. at a time when the United States has never been as divided as it is today. In fact, the last time that the United States was as divided as it is today was the American Civil War of the 1860s. So, can you imagine that? 160 years ago was the American Civil War, and today the United States is as divided as it is then. Because I can tell you that the Republicans and the Democrats and the supporters of Trump and Biden don't agree on anything except one thing. It's time to beat up on China, which is remarkable in a divided country. And so it shows that personalities don't matter, parties don't matter. It's the iron law, geopolitics takes over. We must remain number one. But of course, the big question is, who will win in this contest? Will the United States win, or will China win? And I wonder, maybe if you allow me, Pak Rizal, let me ask a simple question. Please raise your hands. How many of you think that in this contest between United States and China, United States will win? Please raise your hands. 1, 2, help me count, Pak Rizal. I count only 2, is it? Only 2 of you think that the United States will win. How many of you think China will win?
This
Wow.
is Asian country, man. Asian country. This is solidarity of Asia.
No, but I can tell you, if you ask this question in many parts of the world, they will say United States will win. And by the way, I want to emphasize this. The United States is clearly the most formidable great power that the world has seen since human history began. We all talk about the Roman Empire and the British Empire. They were nothing compared to the strength of the United States today. Indeed, no other great power in human history has accumulated as much what I call comprehensive power as the United States has in so many spheres, in the economic sphere, in the military sphere, in the intellectual sphere, in the scientific sphere. In so many spheres, the United States is a formidable country. And at the end of the day, no other country has accomplished as much as what the United States has done. I mean, it's hard to believe the United States sent men to the moon in the 1960s, and no other country can replicate it, right? That's an illustration of how formidable the United States is. That's why in my book, Has China Won?, I have a fictional memo to President Xi Jinping saying, never, never underestimate the United States of America. But at the same time, it would also be a mistake for the United States to underestimate China. Because China, at the end of the day, is still the world's oldest continuous civilization, right? And I tell my American friends, you've only been around for less than 250 years. China has been around 4,000 years. And Chinese civilization has always demonstrated a strength and resilience that no other civilization has demonstrated for so long. And that's why, I'm 75 years old. I want to live to 85 because I want to see the biggest contest ever seen in human history. These are two formidable powers, and they are going to go all out to ensure that they don't get stopped by the other side. And in response to the question, who wins, it's important to understand, just in case you think that this is going to be determined by how many aircraft carriers, how many jet fighters, that's all irrelevant. It's not a military battle. In fact, there's unlikely to be a war between the United States and China, because in a nuclear war, you don't have a winner and a loser. In a nuclear war, you have a loser and a loser. So the United States and China will go all out, but will avoid a direct war with each other, as, par result they did in the first Cold War. United States and Soviet Union also avoided a direct war. But therefore, the most important indicator of which power will win will be determined not by guns and bullets, but by which society has the most dynamic internal society. Which society is more vibrant? Which society is more dynamic? And by the way, there's a very famous American strategic thinker, George Kennan, who in 1949 correctly predicted that the outcome of the contest between the United States and Soviet Union will be determined by which society has more spiritual vitality. Spiritual vitality doesn't mean religious vitality. It means which society has got people who are happy and thriving and dynamic. And of course, American society is in many ways very dynamic. Amazing society. It's the only society that can produce giants, right? Like Google and Amazon and Apple and overnight. And ChatGPT. So American society remains vital. But at the same time, as I said earlier, American society is also very divided. And that's going to be a big challenge for the United States, and that's what could drag the United States back. And I can tell you that next year will be one of the most difficult years for the United States of America, because you have an unusual condition where a majority of Democrats don't want Biden to be the candidate. A majority of Republicans don't want Trump to be the candidate. But who will be the candidates? Biden and Trump. Amazing, right? You can see this paradox, right? So therefore, the internal divisions within the United States are becoming real and dangerous. And by the way, China also, as you know, this year is having a very difficult year. In fact, China's economy was supposed to grow comfortably at 5 or 6% this year. It'll be a struggle. And clearly, China has made mistakes, like in its handling of the exit from COVID-19, that have in many ways slowed down China. So the reason I tell you this is that you must understand that why it's so difficult to predict who will win is that it will depend on internal dynamics within China, internal dynamics within the United States, which are unpredictable. And therefore, it makes the contest very, very difficult to figure out. And then there will be amazing twists and turns, right? I am confident that the contest will accelerate. That's a given. But it will twist and turn. And indeed, as you know, when the trade war was begun by Donald Trump, and after Trump lost the elections, when Biden won, Biden and Xi Jinping had a very good personal relationship. In fact, Joe Biden was the first American president to be elected with a pre-existing personal friendship with his Chinese counterpart, because Xi and Biden had met many times. So everyone thought, wow, things will improve. But guess what? The first 2 years, relations between US and China went down, even though Xi and Biden were friends. But luckily for them, Indonesia organized a G20 meeting in Bali in November last year. And thanks to President Jokowi's hospitality, finally Joe Biden met President Xi Jinping. So you should thank your president. But these are the twists and turns that will happen. Just to give you another example, after the good meeting in Bali, everyone thought that things would get better. And then one balloon appeared over the United States of America. And that one balloon was seen as a big threat to the United States of America. And I'm not exaggerating. American public opinion turned against China dramatically after one balloon. That's an example of a twist and turn that happens. And that's why you can't predict how it's going to go. But certainly the contest will accelerate. Now, what are the implications, therefore? This is my second part, for the rest of the world. And it's important to understand that ASEAN countries will be under pressure from both sides to choose sides. And the pressures will come. And you might think, oh, well, maybe we can resist it. But I can tell you that even some of the major powers can't resist the pressures. Right? I'll tell you a story. In January 2020, I was in Davos. And I was on a panel, sitting on a stage like this, with my counterpart, who's a very senior British figure, very senior British figure. So I asked this senior British figure, January 2023, I noticed that there's a discussion between US and UK about whether or not UK can install Huawei in its telecommunications. And the senior British figure said to me, of course we will. He said, we have planted the GCHQ people. The GCHQ people are the people who control the signals intelligence for the British. He said, we planted our spies inside Huawei. We know what's going on. We have scrapped the Huawei software. We know it's safe. We will proceed with Huawei. So I said to this senior British gentleman, I said, come on. This is not a technical issue. This is a political issue. And this senior British gentleman said to me, you know how the British can be a bit arrogant sometimes. He said, Kishore, the United Kingdom needs the United States. Sorry, the United States needs the United Kingdom as much as UK needs the US. We can withstand the pressure. That was January 2020. By June 2020, boom, UK capitulated and had to ban Huawei. So I tell you the story that even a great power like UK succumbs to such pressures. And so we must be ready for similar pressures coming our way. But that's why it's very, very important over the next 10 years for the 10 ASEAN countries to remain united. Because if we get divided, we'll be under greater pressure. If we stay together, we will be able to handle these pressures. And so if you can, if Golkar Institute has one message to put across, the message must be we in ASEAN must stand together. And at the same time, the remarkable thing about this story, about the impact on the rest of us, is that in the United States still doesn't have a long-term strategy for managing this contest, whereas China has a long-term strategy, right? This is quite amazing when you consider. Now you were saying that you set up the Golkar Institute here in Indonesia. Which country has the largest number of strategic think tanks? It's the United States of America. Which country has the best universities in the world? It is the United States of America. Which country has the most renowned media channels in the world? The New York Times, the Washington Post, is the United States of America. Yet, even though the United States has so many strategic think tanks, it has no strategic thinking. Now, this is an amazing paradox when it comes to the United States and the rest of the world. Whereas China has systematically created interdependence with China, with the rest of the world. So, for example, China launched a Belt and Road Initiative to ensure that other countries would remain integrated with China as the contest evolves against the United States. And that's why, even though in the first Cold War, the United States got so many countries to join it in its contest against the Soviet Union, this time around, very few countries are enthusiastically supporting the United States. And that's a result of the Chinese strategy, and that's a result of the Chinese strategy of getting 140 countries to join the Belt and Road Initiative. So that's an example of strategic thinking on the part of China. So finally, what are the dangers and opportunities for us here in ASEAN? And as I indicated earlier, there's a danger of ASEAN being divided, the 10 of us. And as you know, among the 10 ASEAN countries, I'm not giving a big secret away when I say that some of us in ASEAN are closer to China, some of us in ASEAN are closer to the United States. I mean, as you know, Cambodia and Laos are probably closer to China than they are to the United States. And paradoxically, Vietnam is closer to the United States. And I say paradoxically because the one country that has fought the biggest war against the United States is Vietnam, as you know. But even more paradoxically, the United States always says that this contest between United States and China is a contest between democracy and autocracy, right? President Biden always says democracy versus autocracy. Now, which country is Joe Biden visiting next week? Vietnam. Vietnam is an autocracy, right? Now, I tell you that story to drive home one point. When countries say things, don't believe them. I mean, if this was a contest between democracy and autocracy, how can President Joe Biden go visit an autocracy? He should be visiting a democracy, especially the biggest democracy in Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia. But he chooses to go to an autocracy because Vietnam is vital in the contest against China. So you see how this is how ASEAN's got to be careful. It can be manipulated in this contest. But at the same time, I also want to emphasize that the US-China contest will bring lots of opportunities for us. And you can see it happening already in the field of trade and investment. And here, the good thing is that ASEAN so far has worked very hard to maintain good ties with the United States and maintain good ties with China. And so, for example, the United States has invested more in the ASEAN countries than it has in China, Japan, South Korea, India combined. Now that's amazing, you know. ASEAN's economy is much smaller, but we have so much more American investment. So it shows you that ASEAN has shown that it is attractive to American investors who are not going to put their money in to ASEAN unless they're going to make money from it. So that's something that ASEAN has done correctly. And at the same time, in terms of trade, what is remarkable is that in the year 2000, US trade with ASEAN was $135 billion, and China's trade with ASEAN was only $40 billion, year 2000. US 135, China 40. But by last year, while US trade with ASEAN had grown significantly from $135 billion to $440 billion, big increase, 3.5 times. But China's trade with ASEAN had grown from $40 billion to $975 billion, almost $1 trillion. And what is shocking is that this is the world's largest trading relationship. China and ASEAN, which are smaller economies, do more trade with each other than the United States does with the European Union, which are much bigger economies. That's amazing. And as a result of this, ASEAN has grown phenomenally. I mean, you know, in the year 2000, when Japan's economy, in the year 2000, Japan's economy was the second largest economy in the world. Japan's economy in the year 2000 was 8 times the size of ASEAN, 8 times. Today, Japan's economy is only 1.5 times bigger than ASEAN. And within 10 years, ASEAN's economy will be bigger than Japan's. That's amazing. It shows that ASEAN has been able to capitalize on this US-China contest to grow and develop. We're not perfect, we make mistakes, but we're succeeding. And fortunately for us, you can be very optimistic for the future of ASEAN because of what I call the new CIA. Now, CIA doesn't stand for Central Intelligence Agency, even though there may be some CIA people in this room, I think. As you know, they're everywhere. But CIA stands for China, India, and ASEAN. And I want to mention CIA so that you understand what a remarkable region we live in. China has a population of 1.4 billion. India has a population of 1.4 billion. ASEAN almost 700 million. You add up the three, it comes to 3.5 billion people. Now, among these 3.5 billion people, in the year 2000, there were only 150 million people in the middle class. Only 150 million out of 3.5 billion in the year 2000. But by last year, the number had exploded 10 times to 1.5 billion. And by 2030, around there, you might hit 2.5 billion. Now, this is the largest explosion of middle-class populations anywhere in the world. So what the point here is that while we're going to have this contest that will continue between the US and China, it will have a lot of dangers, but it could also have a lot of opportunities. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pak Kishore. Please do sit down, sir. Young members of Golkar, you have to learn from Pak Kishore. You see how he explained the great powers of the world, the competition, the nature of our time. If you become, years later, leaders of Indonesia, you are not only leaders of Indonesian people, but also you will also be world player. So learn about the world in its complexity, its interaction right now, so you can position the country better in the future. Now, Pak Kishore, I will use my privilege as a moderator to ask you the first question. Pak Aceh, with your permission, some kind of, not a question actually, but food for thought. In Indonesia, Pak Kishore, I mean, I'm sure you are very well aware of it. We have long tradition in our foreign policy that is very well summed up by Bung Hatta's expression. Muhammad Hatta, our co-proclamator, the first Cold War, the Soviet and the US, great power competition, in which he said, our fate is like mendayung di antara dua karang. So sailing between two coral reefs is a metaphor for this problem. Now, how do we continue? This is a very nice philosophically strong principle, and in diplomacy, its expression is called the non-bloc. The leader of which was Sukarno, Nehru, and everything. Now it was good. We have successfully sailed the country under the currents of the former Cold War. Now the new Cold War. Will the principle you have elaborated, the implication of the question in your lecture just now, but what is the new method of this so-called independency and neutrality? I like very much when you said that this great power competition is not only a challenge. It's not only, does not pose problem all the time, but it also provides new possibilities for countries like Indonesia. What are those kind of possibilities and what kind of method that we can use to reap the most benefit from US-China competition in order to make the country and the region better positioned and stronger? That's the first question. I still have the second question, but after you answer the first question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must say thank you very much for telling me what Mr. Hatta said.
Yeah.
How you got to sail between two coral reefs, right?
Right.
I think that's still the right philosophy for Indonesia to adopt vis-a-vis US and China. Maintain good ties with both and do not become an enemy to either. And that will, and frankly, it would also help ASEAN if Indonesia can navigate a good course between the two. Now, you're right. In the first Cold War, there was a strong non-aligned movement that was started by President Sukarno, by Nehru, by Tito. But the difference now is that there is no longer a non-aligned movement. I mean, there is one on paper, but it's not really that strong a force as it used to be in the time of President Sukarno and so on and so forth. But I can tell you that even though at that time there was a non-aligned movement, I attended a non-aligned summit meeting in Havana, Cuba, in 1979. And you know, Cuba was very close to the Soviet Union at that time. And at that summit meeting, the president of Sri Lanka said very wisely, he said, listen, we all claim to be non-aligned countries, He said, actually, there are only two non-aligned countries in the world. United States, Soviet Union. The rest of us, we are all aligned in one way. And so that was actually a very clever statement by his part. And he was right, because, everybody else, all of us. So even within the current non-aligned movement, there are countries that are closer to United States and there are countries that are closer to China. So from Indonesia's point of view, Indonesia would help Southeast Asia a lot by becoming good friends with both United States and with China. And that should also be the ASEAN philosophy. We want to be good friends with United States, we want to be good friends with China. And by the way, I did publish an article in the magazine Foreign Affairs this year in March and April. You can go to my website, mahbubani.net, and download it, that article, because in that article I call it Asia's Third Way. And I say Asia's third way is to maintain good ties with the United States, maintain good ties with China. And I explain why that is the wisest thing to do. I think that is what I would say, that we should heed the advice of Mr. Hatta.
Thank you, thank you. The second question before I go to the floor. In the next 2 decades, let's talk a little bit about long term. Do you think the basic course of what happened during the Cold War before, let's say after the Second World War, we were born right after the Second World War, or before the end of the Second World War, and up 78 years. Now what happens from the Second World War to today? An era we can call Pax Americana, or the system of liberal world order led by the United States. What happened during these long decades was the re-emergence of Japan after the crushing defeat, the emergence of Germany to become a stable, rich, and democratic society. After that, we see Taiwan, we see South Korea, we see Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. First, poor, authoritarian, and became democratic, rich, and stable, including us in the last 25 years. Now, whatever the reasons behind this long-term trend, one of the most important was there is this security umbrella, also trade system that was established in the last 70 years, led by one of the great powers that were competing, which was the United States. That was the fact. And it is very good for mankind, growing to becoming wealthy society, democratic society, and stable society. Now, is it possible, whatever the nature of the great competitions in the coming 2 decades, but the basic trajectory of humanity will follow the example of the past in that sense, growing toward more stable, wealthier, and more open society. Of course, in stages, but the trajectory, you cannot escape from it. Pak Kishore.
I must say that's a great question. And the big question you're asking is, overall, when we are looking at our world, should we feel optimistic or pessimistic? And I can tell you that I personally remain violently optimistic about the future. And the reason why I gave you the statistics about the middle class population in the CIA countries, how it went from 150 million to 1.5 billion, that's an indication of tremendous progress in 20 years. Never before in human history have you seen such advancement. But what's interesting is that if you look at the history of the world since the post-Cold War era, you can describe it in terms of economic phases. And certainly the biggest economic change that happened in the post-Cold War era was the re-emergence of East Asia, right? Starting with Japan, After World War II, it recovered, and then the four tigers, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and then, as you said, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand also did well, and then China opened up, and so all of East Asia has taken off in the last 30 to 40 years. And that's one big change in the global system. That's on the economic side. But on the geopolitical side, you also had some major transitions. So first you had the Cold War starting around 1948-49, right until 1990, 1991, when the Berlin Wall, after the Berlin Wall collapsed. And then you had a unipolar era. In the Cold War, you had a bipolar era. In the post-Cold War era, you had a unipolar world where United States dominated. But now we're entering a multipolar era where there are many, many powers, and it's a much more complex world, by the way. And in this complex world, it will also provide challenges and opportunities. And it certainly, the world is looking for a leader that can guide this multipolar world. In the past, it was the United States that could have done it, you know. But the United States today, partly because it is a domestically troubled country, and United States, by the way, used to be a leader in signing free trade agreements with countries around the world. Now the United States cannot sign a free trade agreement with any country. It's shocking. And by contrast, China, which is run by the Communist Party of China, can sign free trade agreements. You know, I mentioned all this to you to emphasize that the world that is coming towards us is very complex and very complicated. And you have to understand the nuances carefully if you want to understand the world of tomorrow, right? There are no simple black and white descriptions that can fit the state of our world. But having said all that, I still remain, as I said, violently optimistic, because I think the future for Southeast Asia, for East Asia, is still very, very, very positive. And by the way, also for India. India is a country, by the way, that is going to do very, very well over the next 10, 20 years. India somehow or rather, there's an American expression, has recovered its mojo. You know, it means you recovered your vitality. So India is now thrusting forward and under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi in a very strong way, which is, by the way, good for Southeast Asia. Because as you know, for the past 2,000 years, Southeast Asia has been influenced by two major civilizations, China and India. So if China does well, I think China will do well. And if India does well, Southeast Asia will do well. So we will benefit. So in that sense, that's why I'm optimistic for the future.
Thank you, Pak. So we can be optimistic or pessimistic, depending on where you stand. But let me remind the audience, the politicians, the members of parliament, that the direction of the world can suddenly turn in the way that was never thought possible before. He mentioned about the First World War. Lesson from the Second World War was the offspring of First World War. The most important in the sense of historical event was the First World War. Until the last days of the ending of the peace, this is August 1914, more than 2/3 of the members of the British Parliament, the cabinet was led by Prime Minister Asquith then, they did not believe that war between England or Britain and Germany was possible. Germany was the largest trading partner of Britain. And Germany then, led by the Kaiser Wilhelm II, was the rising economic power like China it is now. Nobody believed that war could happen between these two neighboring countries. But war, it did. And destruction of the world for 4 decades after that, the rise of Hitler, the rise of fascism, and communist revolution, right? Nobody thought it was possible before. What we have to do now is to be guarded that history does not repeat itself. Okay? So that's why we have to learn. We have to listen to voices like Pak Kishore. Okay? So as the future leader of the country, you know how to navigate Indonesia. You know how to do what Bung Hatta said long time ago. Mendayung di antara dua karang. Okay, Pak Kishore, I will turn now to the floor and invite 2 or 3 questions, Pak Aceh. You give us time until 5 o'clock, right? So we have 35 minutes to continue our conversation with the floor. Please. 1, 2. Golkar, Pak. Very active and eager to express. That's very good. Tepuk tangan dulu dong buat forumnya. Jadi kita nggak malu-maluin. Iya kan? Bahasa Inggris juga berani. Harus bahasa Inggris ya. Setuju? Setuju. Setuju? Setuju. Nggak ada penerjemah. Baik, saya mulai dengan I will begin with the yes. Ladies first. Here we stand with the principle, ladies first.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. My Honorable, my head of Golkar Institute, Dr. Aceh Hasan Sejeli, and my leader in Golkar, recognize me. I'm from Golkar Institute. My name is Elin. I just hearing about the underestimate violence of domestic. Can you make some measure in our country? How about the violence of domestic? I just hear about if we have some like a dialogue with the other person, we just saying we calm, just calm, and we hear and we learn. So I get violence in maybe in like a little village, yeah, in the big city maybe with the other society, with the level country. So where's the position of violence of domestic? I just say hearing you say about the violence of domestic, which is our citizen find our problem. Can you mention it? Thank you.
Thank you.
And the second question.
Please, please.
Thank you. You just saying underestimate in ASEAN country. Where's the ASEAN country? Underestimate, it's like our country is not same with the US and the China, because our economic may be lower. So can you give some explanation with us about the underestimate our country in ASEAN? Thank you.
Thank you.
I must say, just a second, I didn't quite hear the first question. What was the first question about?
How about the domestic
vitality of Indonesia?
Right.
Yeah, okay. First question is how is the domestic vitality of Indonesia? And the second question was about ASEAN.
ASEAN, the role of
Yeah.
ASEAN. Yeah.
Okay.
Should I give 3 questions first before you answer we can have from the yang paling belakang, yang kacamata. Pakai batik ya Mas, silakan. Bukan depannya, itu yang pakai kacamata.
There's a gentleman here also.
Yeah. There will be the last one from here, but first,
Professor, forgive me for being a bit naive, but isn't it a bit unfair to compare China and the United States using their total GDP instead of their GDP per capita? And isn't it
GDP
possible?
per capita and?
Isn't it a bit unfair that we compare China and US using the total GDP instead of GDP per capita? And my point is that isn't it possible that as GDP per capita rise in China and its society inevitably become more dynamic, as you say, also for structural reasons, China will have to open up. Thank you. That's my question.
Thank you. The last one for this first batch is from here. Thank you, sir.
Your distinguished honor, your distinguished Professor Kishore Mahbubani and Dr. Rizal Malarangeng, thank you for this honorable session. I want to ask two questions, but maybe they're quite a bit long. In this regarding issue of the new Cold War 2.0, is it the major superpower country could be managed in a new security architecture or new nuclear arms treaty like it was done between United States and the Soviet Union in the 70s, like a SALT START treaty to prevent any nuclear arms escalation? And you said about the number two is the CIA, the new future between China, India, and ASEAN. However, is this concept of the new multipolar world is there is no one power is superior to the others can be managed peacefully, because as we all know that China has a territorial dispute with India in Aksai Chin in the north and with South China Sea. Do you think that the ASEAN and India and China can kind of form a new security architecture or kind of the new military dialogues to prevent new miscalculation, new war in the future? Thank you very much.
This is a very important question, Pak Kishore. I rephrase the question about the nuclear element of the competition. How do we understand this nuclear control, arm race, arm control? That was quite successful in the past, in the Cold War, right?
Yeah, I mean like between the United States and Soviet Union, from my understanding, there is a mutual assured destruction between these countries that they assure that destroy each other when there nuclear conflict. Do you think that United States and China need kind of this new doctrine to prevent a nuclear or military power?
Very good question, sir. Please, Pak Kishore.
Okay, wow, lots of questions. I can see that the Golkar Institute attracts very strong questioning minds. I congratulate you on that. That's very, very good. Now, the first question about the domestic vitality of Indonesia, I think many Indonesians actually underappreciate Indonesia. Because the story of Indonesia is in some ways a remarkable one, right? You had for a long time, as you know, one ruler, President Suharto, for a long time, President 1965 to 1998, I think. And of course, the Western media criticized Indonesia for being run by a dictator. But there's no question that Indonesia made lots of economic progress under President Suharto's rule. And after he left, as you know, you change a lot of presidents. And everybody said, oh, Indonesia is condemned to political instability forever. And yet, to everybody's surprise, you emerge as the most successful democracy anywhere in the Islamic world, and you've had political stability and continuity now for over 2 decades. So this is actually quite a remarkable achievement that many countries are envious of, right? So this, what you have done in terms of your political development is a remarkable story. But again, it's something that Indonesians are not aware of, and the rest of the world is not aware of. And I think you've got to market the Indonesian story a bit better. Of course, I tried to do so, as you know, with the article I wrote about the genius of Jokowi and about how Indonesia is performing so well. So I would say that Indonesians have a lot to be proud about. You have many challenges. I must emphasize this. Indonesia will face many challenges. But if you deal with these challenges with confidence and optimism, then you can overcome them, for sure. So I'm optimistic for Indonesian domestic vitality. Now, your second question about ASEAN, you know, ASEAN is an incredibly imperfect organization. It does things in a very strange way, right? And it always makes mistakes. But just before coming here, Dr. Mulya can tell you, I gave a lecture at the Indonesian Business Council today at 1 o'clock, and I surprised everyone by saying that, do you all know that ASEAN is the most successful regional organization in the whole world? Nobody knows. And if you question me, I ask you a simple question. Which other regional organization is doing better? You look at South Asian Association of Regional Cooperation. India and Pakistan don't trade with each other. No normal trade. You take the Gulf Cooperation Council. Saudi Arabia and UAE imposed sanctions on Qatar for several years, right? And then you go to Mercosur in South America. The Mercosur is supposed to be an economic union. In 20 years, their trade went up 1.2 times. Trade among ASEAN went up 4 times. You see? And if you compare us to the European Union, you ask yourself, 10 years ago, who would break up first? Would ASEAN break up first or European Union break up first? Everybody would say ASEAN lah, ASEAN's weaker. Guess what? The European Union had Brexit and United Kingdom left European Union. No, as they say, pecah, right? Broken. So you can see ASEAN is outperforming every regional organization in the world. So we should all thank ASEAN. Now, on the third question about per capita income of China, and you're right that the per capita income of China is much lower than that of the United States. But that's precisely why the room for growth for China is enormous, right? And you know, the Americans go through phases of believing that China's growth story has stopped. And by the way, just today, I was reading an article in Bloomberg saying, oh, China can no longer overtake the United States. Now, you know, per capita income is supposed to reflect to some extent the capability of a country. Now, if you assume that the average Chinese is just 25% as smart as the average American, then the per capita income of China should be 1/4 that of the United States. If China's per capita income is 1/4 of the United States, China's economy becomes bigger than the United States. So, you know, it's a huge mistake, I think, to underestimate China. You know, the Chinese today have a determination that almost no other country has. Why does China have that determination? It's because of the century of humiliation that China suffered. Now, all of you should study China's century of humiliation. And by the way, I know you can watch me on the Golkar app, but there's another free educational platform called EDX. EDX. Go to EDX, put my name in. There's a free course, 4 lectures on the century of humiliation. please study the century of humiliation. Then you'll understand why China has a drive and dynamism that is so powerful, because China doesn't want to be slapped again with another century of humiliation. That's why I think the Americans are making a mistake in underestimating China. Now, the final question involved the South China Sea also, I believe. And you're right, the South China Sea is going to be a problematic area in the relations between the 4 ASEAN claimant states. Because China's differences in the South China Sea are not with the 10 ASEAN countries, but with the 4 claimant states, namely Malaysia, Brunei, Philippines, Vietnam. And in theory, the differences over South China Sea could lead to war. It's possible. But I think it's very unlikely. Because China, at this stage, needs ASEAN very much. And so this is the time for ASEAN to conclude the negotiations on the Code of Conduct with China. So I'm reasonably optimistic that we can prevent a war on the South China Sea between the ASEAN claimant states and China. But at the same time, we have to stand very firm against China. And it's important for all 10 of us to tell China that it's got to handle the South China Sea issue carefully. Now, finally, on the issue of nuclear weapons, you know, as I said earlier, the United States has made some mistakes in its management of the rise of China. But the biggest mistake that the United States has made has been to motivate China to produce more nuclear weapons. For a long time, you know, Russia had, I think, 4,000 nuclear weapons or 5,000 nuclear weapons. United States had 4,000, 5,000 nuclear weapons. China only had 250. The Chinese were happy with 250. But I can tell you, because the United States has been pushing China so hard, the Chinese said, okay, I will now make the United States feel insecure. And so they're increasing their nuclear weapons initially from 250 to 1,000. And after 1,000, they'll go up. And then the United States will say, oh, maybe not. Maybe I should come to some understanding with China. So, and I say this as a friend of the United States. Why did you wake up the Chinese nuclear dragon? That was so unwise.
Thank you, Pak Kishore. Thank you. Big applause to Pak Kishore. Every time he mentioned nuclear power or destructive power, it reminds us of the new movie, Oppenheimer. Remember the quotation from Bhagavad Gita, Oppenheimer? Yeah. I have become death, the destruction of the world. That's what we have to avoid, Pak Kishore. And Pak Kishore mentioned about ASEAN. You guys have to really understand the role of ASEAN. It's true, like Pak Kishore said, the most successful regional entity cooperation in the world. The problem is nobody knows about it, or rarely people knows. Well, the best spokesperson of ASEAN before was Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew. He was a man of stature, world stature, who was able to converse easily with such prominent persons like Henry Kissinger or President Nixon on equal intellectual terms. Now, after Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, what we have left is Kishore Mahbubani. So maybe we should emphasize this role. And also for Indonesia, it's nice. He wrote several months ago before G20 a very popular article, the title he mentioned before, The Genius of Jokowi. Everybody talk about the article in Indonesia, in Jakarta especially. And the newspapers also explain Pak Jokowi since then with the terms used by Pak Kishore, the genius of Jokowi. As a member of coalition of Jokowi, we agree with you, Pak. Now, before I continue to the floor, we still have time. I think you agree if we invite one question from our distinguished special guest from the think tank of Pak Prabowo, Gerindra. Agree? So please, Pak Burhanuddin, it's up to you or the member of your think tank, because Pak Prabowo explained to us last week in Golkar Institute that you were the brain behind the Prabowo campaign. Please, Pak. Former Governor of Bangladesh.
I thank you very much, Professor Mahbubani, for your enriching and stimulating speech just now. I have probably not a question, but this is just a wondering whether or not possible. In this world that we are facing, the competing power between the US and China will only, in my opinion, get two results. The first result is win and lose, and the second result is lose and lose. Is it possible to think the utopic world in the future that the US and China work together in a cooperation so humanity will benefit? That's my first question. The second thing is, you mentioned in your lecture that the determining factors of who will win the race between China and the US is the internal dynamic of those two countries, China and then the US. And the implication of those competing powers, you mentioned that we have Indonesia and ASEAN has to united together. That's what first thing. And the second thing, and we have to communicate and even do business in a fair way among the US, ASEAN, and also China, so that our export, our productivity will increase. My question is, isn't that we also need internal dynamics of each of our own country to respond to this political bickering between these two countries? That's my two questions. Thank you very much.
Question was, is it possible for US and China to cooperate and work with each other? And your second question was on the 10 ASEAN countries, how we manage the US-China contest, and what will it depend on? Yeah. Well, on the first question, actually, one reason why I am writing a lot about the US-China contest is that I'm trying to persuade both sides that this contest will not benefit US or China. And if you look at the conclusion of my book, Has China Won? In the last chapter, I try to explain to both US and China there's a wiser course of action for both of them. There's a win-win solution. And of course, as part of the win-win solution, one of the key arguments I make is that actually United States and China, while they see each other as their primary challenges, actually both of them, together with the rest of the world, face some common global challenges like climate change, like pandemics, like global financial crisis. So in some ways, the world has changed, and now the time has come for United States and China to escape from the clutches of the iron law of geopolitics and learn to work together to deal with common challenges. And if indeed we are supposed, human beings are supposed to be very intelligent, rational human beings, that's what we should be doing. In fact, in the last paragraph of my book, has China won? I say that if we saw two tribes of apes fighting each other while the forest around them was burning, you say these apes are so stupid. The forest is burning and they are fighting each other. But that's exactly what United States and China are doing, because under climate change, the forests are burning and they're fighting each other, which is stupid. So my goal in writing about US and China is precisely to persuade both of them to press the pause button on the US-China contest and focus on the common global economic and other challenges that we face in the world. So this is why we must speak out. And unfortunately, we Asians tend to be too polite. And Indonesians are especially polite.
Maybe because for us, silence is golden. Silence is golden.
But I think it's important for countries like Indonesia to be a bit more frank in talking to United States and China and say, hey, you'll be both better off if you stop this contest and find ways and means of cooperating against global economic challenges. And I think that's the message that I hope that Indonesia can also convey. Now, in terms of how if you're hinting that among the 10 different ASEAN countries, there are different approaches to US and China, you're absolutely right. They're very different. Because some, as I mentioned, are closer to China, like Cambodia and Laos. Some are closer to United States, like Vietnam. Some are very clever, like Thailand. I mean, Thailand is technically an ally of the United States, you know. There are only two countries in ASEAN that are allies of the United States, Thailand and Philippines. But if you ask me, is Thailand closer to the US or to China? I don't know. The Thais are very clever. You know, the only country that wasn't colonized in the 19th century was Thailand. The Thais know how to, I think there's a word called elak, right? Avoid. Yeah. So you know how the Thais know how to avoid getting caught, you know. So there different countries will play the game in different ways. Singapore is actually very open, and the Prime Minister has said openly, both in an article in Foreign Affairs and in a speech in Shangri-La Dialogue, Singapore will not take sides. We'll be friends with the US, he'll be friends with China. So I think that's how it is. So you're right, the story within ASEAN is very complex and nuanced, and not so simple to say it is for one or the other. And in the case of Vietnam, by the way, even though the Vietnamese are today in some ways closer to United States, that's why Joe Biden is going to go there next week, the Vietnamese actually have handled China longer than any other Southeast Asian society has. They've been neighbors of China for 2,000 years, and Vietnam was occupied by China only for 1,000 years. Only 1,000 years. So the Vietnamese leaders have a saying that to become a leader of Vietnam, you must be able to stand up to China, and you must be able to get along with China. If you cannot stand up and get along, you cannot become leader of China. You cannot become leader of Vietnam. So you can see, therefore, different ASEAN countries have their own wisdom on how to handle US and China. That's why it's interesting to study the different experience of all 10. And you find very interesting stories among the 10.
Thank you, Pak Kishore. Please, once again, big applause for Pak Kishore. I think we still have time, Pak Aceh, for last batch of questions, 2 or 3 at most. One, of course you can. 2, see, for us silence is not golden. We have a voice to express. Third one, ya. Jadi 1, 2, 3, yes. Please, you can start, sir. Ada mic-nya nggak buat depan?
For giving me some time for raising some questions. The way how you put the domestic sources in the United States and China as part of the contestations, you said that divided America and autocracy and pro-democracy in China become very important factors to lead this contestation to become either cooperations or total war in the next maybe 10 or 15 years from now. Just wondering if you can put into Indonesian's context, in 2024, there will be elections. And domestic sources of the way how Indonesian government to make a choice in 10 or 15 years from now will be very important to address, sir. We do have anti-America sentiments or anti-Western as part of legacies of colonialism and so on. And we do have anti-China sentiment too. And how you put this contestation within our domestic sources as the way we make a choice in the next 10 years. I'm not referring to the president candidate that sentiment to if we have to make a choice between contestation between the United States and China in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. So the question is not who will win in 2024.
Yes.
But what kind of sentiment?
What kind of choice that we have to make?
Understood, sir. Let's avoid that question first. Who will win in 2024? Yes, sir. Lady. Ini pakai baju merah tapi hatinya kuning. The mic, please.
All right, thank you for the time. So I thought the chance will be me first because Mr. Rizal told that the ladies first before. All right, so actually this is not a question, but it's more like an additional perspective. Is that okay? Yeah, so as Mr. Kishore already said that the ASEAN is different with the European Union institution because ASEAN is like better than European Union, but for me, we cannot say that because European Union and ASEAN has a different way. European Union is an institution as a supranational, with all 27 countries in the EU is giving their sovereignty to as the European Union, but it's different with ASEAN. ASEAN is intergovernmental institutions with 10 of ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. We will not give our sovereignty as ASEAN. The proof is like in EU, they have a euro currency. All the 27 countries in European Union, they trade with euro. But in ASEAN, no. Indonesia has rupiah, Malaysia has ringgit, Singapore has dollar, and so on. So this is, for me, from my perspective, that we cannot compare the European Union and ASEAN because it is two different kind of institution, which is the European Union is a supranational, with all the 27 countries of the Europe is giving their sovereignty to the European Union as Europe, but ASEAN is more intergovernmental because each 10 ASEAN countries still have the sovereignty by their own, not just for the currency, but for the working chance as well. Let's say I'm Germany, I can work in French, I can work in the Netherlands, I can work everywhere in the Euro, but not in ASEAN. It's not that simple. And the other things as well, regarding how they manage the conflict. Let's say in 2014, the Greece has a monetary conflict, financial crisis, and the European Union is helping the Greece to get out the Greece from the financial crisis at the time. But it's different with the ASEAN because ASEAN is more like intergovernmental, so the 10 ASEAN countries is not giving their sovereignty to the institution, but they have their sovereignty by their own. It's different with the European Union. And that one. And the other one is come to my mind as well about when the guy with the glasses mentioned about we cannot compare the GDP with the China and US. Of course not, but these two rising power between China and the US can be seen also by their alliance. The China now has building the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa alliance, and the US alliance for sure, the European Union, the UK, and the Western counterpart, the Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. So by this meaning that their alliance also determine these two superpower, like where the world is headed between these two, not just by the US and China only, but their alliances as well. We need to take a look that China is now having a BRICS, and the US has NATO, the NATO agreement and so on and stuff. Check, hello. Okay. So this is why the global powers can be seen not just by only the US, but China, but also for their country alliance. And the other thing that about whether can be China and the US work together in the future. For me, it can be, because one of my favorite quotes from Winston Churchill, the former United Kingdom Prime Minister, he says that there are no eternal friends or eternal enemies, only eternal interests. So of course, the China and US can work together if they both have the same and common national interests. So does Indonesia. When people ask where is the Indonesia position, either China or the US, it depends on our national interests. It's like which national interest that suits us more. Is it China or is it the US? But as our founding fathers said that we have non-block policy, that yes, we cannot say that we are more into China but more in the US, but it's depends on our national interest. Actually, my additional. Thank you very much for the challenge.
Thank you. Are you also a caleg?
No.
Okay.
I'm in the.
If you are a caleg,
yeah,
and you win to Senayan, we'll send you to Komisi 1.
Oh yeah, can I? I'm open to collaboration. Thank you so much. My name is Fina. Thank you.
Komisi 1.
Thank you so much.
Last question. Yes, please. Can you make your question short, because we are close to 5 o'clock now.
I have only two issues. Number one is, what is the impact of the changing of geopolitical that happens in the Middle East country with the emerging of Muhammad bin Middle East country, especially Saudi Arabia. As we know, Muhammad bin Salman are taking a very drastic turn regarding on how Saudi Arabia play their role in the Middle East country. And the second is that, the last one is that, as we know that democracy usually are marketed as the only or the ultimate solution for prosper and also for having a better country. But with China's situation, which is they are more autocratic system in politics, communist, is it the world will change towards that understanding? Is it democracy is the answer? Because if we see China, it seems democracy is not always the answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Please, Pak Kishore.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, so I'll try to be as brief as possible in my responses. So the first question, when you talk about domestic sentiment in Indonesia, some is pro-US and some is pro-China. I would say the first lesson in geopolitics I tell anybody is, if you ever make geopolitical decisions on the basis of sentiments, you're shooting yourself in the head. Geopolitics is a cold and dangerous business. You must set aside your emotions and be cunning and calculating. And countries that are not cunning and calculating suffer. Now, we haven't discussed Ukraine at all. But one reason why the Ukraine as a country is suffering is that its leaders were not cunning or calculating. Their sentiments guided them when they should have been aware that there's a limit to how far you can push Russia. If you push Russia too much, the Russians have to punch you back. So that was a geopolitical mistake in some ways. The Russian invasion is illegal. I'm not defending the Russian invasion. But at the same time, the war could have been avoided if they were less sentimental and more cunning. So in geopolitics, never allow sentiments to guide you. Now, the second part about Europe and what Europe has done and about the second part about interests. I agree with you that in the European Union, the countries have given up more of their sovereignty than they have in ASEAN, but not all their sovereignty. So France still remains a permanent member of the UN Security Council. If the French didn't have an independent foreign policy, they should give their seat to the European Union, but they won't. And I don't have time to explain this, but you can go and read my writings. And you know, the Master of Ceremonies mentioned that my latest book, The Asian 21st Century, is a free book. You can download it for free. Has been downloaded, I think, 3.24 million times. You'll find essays down there that document that the European Union has become geopolitically incompetent. It has become geopolitically incompetent because the biggest challenge to Europe is going to come from the demographic explosion in Africa. But instead of focusing on Africa, which is what they should focus on, they're wasting their time on Russia. Russia is not a threat to Europe. Now, that's the kind of geopolitical incompetence we must never repeat in Southeast Asia. And on the question of interests vis-a-vis US and China, unfortunately, in the United States, there is an absolute conviction that being number one is the number one interest. And the United States cannot psychologically accept being number two. Even though I keep telling my American friends, so what if you're the number two economy, if you remain the most admired country in the world? Why do you have to push down China? You don't have to. So it's not just about interests, it's about how you perceive your interests. And I think the United States will be better off in not pushing China down, but pushing America up. That will be a wiser policy for the United States of America. Now, the final question on democracy, you're right. There is an ongoing global contest of ideas, including on democracy. And there's no doubt that the United States has, until recently, been the most successful democracy in the world. Except, if you look at chapter 7 of my book, the reason I mentioned chapter 7 is that I provide so much data to prove that the United States is no longer a functioning democracy. The United States today is a plutocracy. In a democracy, it is the voice of the people that determines the public policy decisions. In a plutocracy, is the voice of the money that determines public policy decisions. And sadly, and by the way, I'm not the one who's saying the United States is a plutocracy. The late Paul Volcker said it. The Nobel laureate Joseph Stiglitz says it. Martin Wolf of Financial Times says it. And so, if there's a contest of ideas, there's an even bigger contest because some countries which are supposed to be democracies have unfortunately not fulfilled their hopes as democracies. And I'm glad you raised the question of democracy because Indonesia so far has been remarkably successful as a democracy, but I want to tell you that remaining successful as a democracy is very difficult. So I can tell you that you in Indonesia are going to have a very challenging time preserving your democracy.
With that, thank you very much, Pak Kishore. We close the remarks with discussion about the nature of democracy and the future of democracy, and I think it requires another 2 hours. But unfortunately, we have come to the end of our very interesting lecture, very powerful, and for the young members of Golkar Party, one of the lesson that you can, bring far into the future. International politics is always matter. Great power politics, geopolitics matters a lot, especially in a big country, in a strategically located country like Indonesia. So it is our responsibility to follow whatever happens in the world and to participate actively. It is also a constitutional duty for Indonesia to be an active participant for peace and stability of the world. So thank you very much, Pak Kishore, Pak Ludwig, thank you very much, Pak Aceh, thank you very much, Pak Raden, you already a very good friend, a Gerindra think tank, we have Airlangga think tank, right? So Pak Prabowo think tank, Pak Airlangga think tank, Dr. Raden Pardede, Pak Muli, don't forget, since the beginning of Golkar Institute, when we were discussing the idea of Golkar Institute, Pak Kishore Mahbubani was always there with us, discussing and giving examples about what is the best institute to establish. Right, Pak Aceh? So we can also say Pak Kishore was one of the founders of Golkar Institute. Welcome, Pak Erwin, also one of the founders of Golkar Institute. So again, big applause for Pak Kishore for all the role. Thank you, then I return the mic to Ibu Dinda. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, now we have come to the end of the public lecture event. On behalf of Golkar Institute, we would like to say thank you so much for Professor Kishore Mahbubani for your enlightening and thought-provoking lecture. And thank you so much for Bapak Rizal Malarangeng for guiding this enlightening discourse. And we would like to say thank you so much for our participants. Dimohon untuk semua member Dewan Partai Golkar dan Golkar Institute untuk foto bersama di depan. teman-teman semua untuk yang mau stay, kita masih ada makan untuk dinner, bisa stay di sini. Dan kita juga mau mengumumkan bahwa kita punya next event bersama Presiden Philippines 2001 sampai 2010, Gloria Macapagal Arroyo pada 16 September. Untuk teman-teman yang tertarik mendaftar di next event Golkar, bisa langsung mendaftarkan dirinya di meja registrasi di depan. Terima kasih banyak. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.